Hi guys, tonight we're exploring a dramatic atmospheric change. What if you woke up tomorrow and the oxygen in our atmosphere had suddenly doubled from 21 to 42%? Your first breath would feel different, and the world would never be the same. If you enjoy these atmospheric transformation sleep stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And drop a comment letting me know what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. I love connecting with science enthusiasts around the world. All right, let's begin. Picture this moment. You wake tomorrow morning, step outside your door, and take your first breath of what should be ordinary air. But something feels different. Your lungs fill more completely than they ever have before. Colours seem more vivid, your mind feels sharper, and every cell in your body tingles with an unfamiliar energy. Without realizing it, you've just inhaled air that contains 42% oxygen instead of the 21% that has sustained life on Earth for millions of years. Overnight, our planet's atmospheric composition has fundamentally changed, and the world as we know it is about to transform in ways both wondrous and terrifying. Earth's atmosphere currently contains approximately 5.15 times 10 to the 18th power kilograms of gas, with nitrogen comprising 78%, oxygen 21%, and trace gases making up the remainder. This delicate balance took billions of years to achieve, beginning roughly 2.4 billion years ago during what scientists call the Great Oxidation Event. But imagine if that carefully calibrated mixture suddenly shifted, doubling the oxygen concentration from its current level of approximately 110,000 parts per million to 420,000 parts per million. The implications would ripple through every aspect of existence on our planet. Your enhanced morning breath represents just the beginning of a cascade of changes that would unfold across multiple timescales. In the immediate hours following this atmospheric shift, the most noticeable effects would manifest in the biological realm. Every oxygen-breathing organism on Earth, from the smallest bacteria to the largest mammals, would experience what amounts to a planetary-wide performance enhancement. Human beings, with our highly developed cardiovascular and respiratory systems, would feel the effects almost immediately. The human brain, which normally consumes about 20% of our body's total oxygen supply, despite representing only 2% of our body weight, would suddenly receive nearly double its usual oxygen delivery. This hyperoxic state would initially feel exhilarating. Cognitive function would sharpen dramatically. Mental fatigue would seem to evaporate. Students cramming for exams in Tokyo would find themselves absorbing information at unprecedented rates. Chess masters in Moscow would calculate moves with lightning speed. Emergency room doctors in São Paulo would think with crystal clarity during critical procedures. But this cognitive enhancement comes with a dangerous edge. Oxygen toxicity becomes a real concern when atmospheric levels exceed normal ranges for extended periods. The central nervous system begins to show signs of stress when exposed to elevated oxygen concentrations, particularly at the cellular level, where increased oxygen can lead to the production of harmful reactive oxygen species. These molecular fragments can damage cell membranes, proteins, and DNA. Within 24 to 48 hours, people might begin experiencing symptoms reminiscent of oxygen poisoning, nausea, dizziness, and in severe cases, seizures. Athletes around the world would initially experience what might seem like a miraculous transformation. A marathon runner training in the hills outside Nairobi would find their usual 26-mile route feeling surprisingly manageable. Their blood, now carrying significantly more oxygen to muscle tissues, would delay the onset of fatigue. Lactic acid buildup, the burning sensation that signals muscle exhaustion, would occur much later in physical exertion. Professional cyclists competing in the Tour de France would power up mountain passes that previously left them gasping for air, The enhanced oxygen availability would effectively raise the ceiling on human physical performance across all activities requiring aerobic capacity. Mountain climbers attempting to scale peaks like Mount Everest, where oxygen levels at the summit are typically only 1/3 of sea level concentrations, would find the thin air far more manageable. The death zone above 8,000 meters, where the human body cannot acclimatize to the low oxygen levels and begins to shut down, might effectively cease to exist. However, this athletic renaissance would be accompanied by concerning side effects. The increased oxygen in bloodstream would make blood more viscous, putting additional strain on hearts worldwide. Cardiovascular systems, evolved over millions of years to operate within specific oxygen parameters, would struggle to adapt to the new conditions. Blood pressure would likely increase across populations, particularly affecting the elderly and those with pre-existing heart conditions. While humans grapple with their transformed physiology, the rest of Earth's oxygen-dependent life would undergo its own dramatic changes. Insects, whose respiratory systems operate through a network of tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to tissues, would experience perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The efficiency of their breathing apparatus would suddenly double, removing one of the primary constraints on insect size that has existed since the Carboniferous period 300 million years ago. During that ancient era, when atmospheric oxygen levels reached 35%, Earth was home to dragonflies with wingspans of 75 centimeters and millipedes stretching over 2 meters in length. In our doubled oxygen world, we might witness the return of giant arthropods. Dragonflies in the Amazon rainforest could develop wingspans approaching those of small birds. Beetles in the forests of Borneo might grow to the size of small mammals. The implications for ecosystems would be staggering, as these enlarged insects would require dramatically more food, potentially disrupting established food webs that have remained stable for millennia. Birds, already among the most efficient oxygen users in the animal kingdom, due to their unique respiratory system with air sacs that allow for continuous airflow, would become aerial superstars. A peregrine falcon, already capable of reaching diving speeds of over 300 km per hour, might exceed 400 km per hour. Migrating birds like Arctic terns, which already complete the longest migration in the animal kingdom by travelling roughly 70,000 kilometres annually from Arctic to Antarctic and back, could potentially extend their range even further or complete their journeys with unprecedented efficiency. The metabolic rates of virtually all animals would increase substantially. A pride of lions on the Serengeti would find their hunting capabilities enhanced by improved endurance and faster recovery times between hunts. However, this metabolic boost would come at a cost: dramatically increased caloric requirements. Animals would need to consume significantly more food to fuel their oxygen-enhanced metabolisms, potentially leading to rapid depletion of food sources and subsequent ecosystem collapse in regions where resources are already scarce. Marine environments would face their own unique challenges and transformations. Ocean waters currently contain dissolved oxygen at concentrations that vary by depth, temperature and location, typically ranging from 6 to 8 milligrams per litre in surface waters. With atmospheric oxygen doubling, the ocean's capacity to absorb oxygen would increase dramatically, particularly in coastal regions where water interfaces directly with the atmosphere. This oxygen enrichment would initially appear beneficial for marine life. Fish species that currently struggle in oxygen-poor waters, such as those found in oceanic dead zones, would experience a renaissance. The Gulf of Mexico, which annually develops a dead zone covering approximately 22,000 square kilometers due to agricultural runoff depleting oxygen levels, might see this region shrink dramatically or disappear entirely. Deep-sea creatures, many of which have evolved specialized adaptations to survive in low oxygen environments, would face an entirely new reality. The abyssal plains of the Pacific Ocean, where creatures like the bizarre anglerfish and giant isopods have thrived in near-zero oxygen conditions, would suddenly become oxygen-rich environments. This could prove catastrophic for species that have spent millions of years adapting to oxygen scarcity. The increased dissolved oxygen would also accelerate decomposition processes in marine environments. Organic matter that currently accumulates in ocean sediments due to slow decay in low oxygen conditions would begin breaking down much more rapidly. This accelerated decomposition would release vast quantities of carbon dioxide that have been sequestered in ocean floor sediments for potentially thousands of years, adding another layer of complexity to the global climate implications of our oxygen-doubled world. Perhaps nowhere would the effects be more immediately visible and dramatic than in the realm of fire and combustion. Fire requires three elements to exist: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Remove any one of these components, and combustion cannot occur. Double the oxygen, and fire behavior transforms completely. Every flame on Earth would burn approximately twice as hot and spread roughly 4 times as fast. A simple campfire that might normally reach temperatures of around 800 degrees Celsius could easily exceed 1,200 degrees Celsius. Forest fires, already among the most destructive natural disasters on our current Earth, would become absolutely catastrophic. The massive wildfires that have devastated regions like California, where the Camp Fire of 2018 burned over 600 square kilometers and destroyed nearly 19,000 structures, would seem modest by comparison. In a 42% oxygen atmosphere, a lightning strike in the dry forest near Los Angeles could ignite fires that spread at unprecedented rates, potentially consuming entire metropolitan areas before firefighting efforts could even be mobilized. Traditional firefighting methods would prove largely ineffective. Fire departments worldwide rely on water, foam, and carbon dioxide to suppress flames by removing heat and oxygen from the combustion triangle. But when the atmosphere itself contains double the normal oxygen concentration, these suppression techniques would be fighting an uphill battle against an inexhaustible supply of oxidizer in the air itself. The implications extend far beyond natural wildfires. House fires would become incredibly dangerous, with flames spreading through structures in minutes rather than the hours that current building codes and fire safety protocols are designed around. A kitchen grease fire in an apartment building in New York City could potentially engulf the entire structure before residents could evacuate. Shopping centres, hospitals, schools, and other public buildings would become fire traps despite meeting all current safety standards. Industrial facilities would face unprecedented challenges. Oil refineries, chemical plants, and manufacturing facilities that work with flammable materials would need to completely redesign their safety protocols. The massive industrial complexes along the Gulf Coast of Texas, which process millions of barrels of oil daily, would likely need to shut down entirely until new safety systems could be developed and implemented. Even seemingly innocuous activities would become dangerous. The simple act of lighting a cigarette could result in severe burns, as the tobacco and paper would burn far more intensely than expected. Barbecue grills would become potential explosive devices. Birthday candles could turn cake celebrations into dangerous affairs. Gas stoves in homes worldwide would produce flames hot enough to damage cookware not designed for such extreme temperatures. The transportation sector would face immediate and severe disruptions. Internal combustion engines, which power the vast majority of the world's approximately 1.4 billion vehicles, operate within carefully calibrated parameters that assume a specific air-to-fuel ratio. With oxygen levels doubled, every car, truck, motorcycle, and diesel vehicle on Earth would suddenly be running extremely lean, meaning too much oxygen relative to fuel. Most modern vehicles are equipped with oxygen sensors that monitor exhaust gases and adjust fuel delivery accordingly, but these systems have operational limits. The dramatic increase in atmospheric oxygen would overwhelm these compensatory mechanisms, leading to engines running hot, producing excessive nitrogen oxides, and potentially suffering catastrophic failure. The catalytic converters designed to reduce emissions would be operating far outside their intended parameters, likely failing within days or weeks. Aviation would face even more severe challenges. Commercial aircraft engines are precisely tuned for the atmospheric conditions at various altitudes. A Boeing 747 cruising at 11,000 meters altitude, where air pressure is about 25% of sea level and oxygen concentration, is correspondingly reduced. Suddenly encountering doubled oxygen levels would experience thrust characteristics completely outside its design parameters. Flight computers programmed with fuel consumption algorithms based on current atmospheric composition would provide dangerously inaccurate calculations. Airports worldwide would likely ground all flights until engineers could determine safe operating procedures. The economic impact would be immediate and devastating. Global air travel, which transports over 4 billion passengers annually and generates approximately $898 billion in revenue, would cease virtually overnight. Supply chains dependent on air cargo, particularly for high-value, time-sensitive goods like pharmaceuticals and electronics, would face severe disruptions. The energy sector would confront challenges across multiple domains. Power plants that rely on combustion, whether burning coal, natural gas, or oil, would need to adjust their operations significantly. A typical coal-fired power plant designed to burn approximately 14,000 tons of coal per day would find its combustion chambers operating at temperatures and pressures outside design specifications. Boilers might overheat, requiring emergency shutdowns to prevent catastrophic failures. Natural gas power plants, which have become increasingly important as a bridge fuel in many countries' transition away from coal, would face similar challenges. The Marcellus Shale region of Pennsylvania, which produces approximately 6 billion cubic feet of natural gas daily, supplies power plants throughout the northeastern United States. These facilities would need to completely recalibrate their operations to account for the altered combustion characteristics in the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Nuclear power plants, while not directly affected by atmospheric oxygen changes, would face indirect challenges related to emergency response procedures. Many nuclear facilities rely on diesel generators for backup power in case of emergencies. These generators, like all combustion engines, would be operating outside their design parameters in the high oxygen atmosphere, potentially compromising the safety systems they're designed to protect. Renewable energy sources would suddenly become even more critical. Solar panel installations, which convert sunlight directly to electricity without combustion, would be unaffected by atmospheric changes. Wind turbines, which harness kinetic energy from moving air masses, might actually benefit slightly from the increased air density that comes with higher oxygen concentrations. Hydroelectric dams would continue operating normally, making regions with abundant renewable energy resources suddenly much more strategically valuable. The implications for global food production would be complex and far-reaching. Plants, which produce oxygen through photosynthesis while consuming carbon dioxide, would find themselves in a dramatically altered atmospheric environment. Many crop species might initially benefit from increased oxygen availability to their root systems, particularly in waterlogged soils where oxygen is typically limited. Rice paddies in countries like China and India, which produce approximately 750 million tons of rice annually to feed billions of people, might see improved yields as root systems receive enhanced oxygen delivery. However, the increased fire risk would pose severe threats to agricultural regions. The vast wheat fields of Kansas, which typically produce around 400 million bushels annually, would become tinderboxes susceptible to rapid spreading fires that could destroy entire harvests within hours. The same elevated fire risk would threaten the Corn Belt of Iowa and Illinois, regions that produce approximately 40% of the world's corn supply. Fruit orchards and vineyards would face particular challenges. The famous wine regions of France, Italy, and California depend on precisely controlled growing conditions developed over centuries of agricultural tradition. The altered atmospheric composition would affect not only fire risk, but also the subtle biochemical processes that determine flavor profiles in grapes and other fruits. The Napa Valley, which produces wines valued at approximately $4.2 billion annually, might see fundamental changes in wine characteristics that could take decades to understand and adapt to. Livestock agriculture would experience both benefits and challenges. Cattle, sheep, and other ruminants would initially benefit from enhanced oxygen delivery to their tissues, potentially improving growth rates and milk production. The dairy industry, which produces approximately 843 million tons of milk globally each year, might see temporary increases in productivity. However, the increased metabolic rates caused by elevated oxygen levels would also increase caloric requirements for livestock. Feed costs, already a major expense for agricultural operations, would increase substantially. A dairy farm in Wisconsin that currently consumes 50 tons of feed daily might need to increase consumption by 20 to 30% to maintain milk production levels. The global economy would face unprecedented disruptions across virtually every sector. Manufacturing facilities dependent on controlled combustion processes would need to shut down pending safety assessments and equipment modifications. The automotive industry, which produces approximately 95 million vehicles annually worldwide, would face immediate production halts as assembly lines that use welding, painting, and other heat-intensive processes would become too dangerous to operate. Financial markets would likely experience extreme volatility as investors grapple with the implications of a fundamentally altered world. The insurance industry, which collected approximately $5 trillion in premiums globally in recent years, would face claims far exceeding their catastrophe reserves. Property insurance covering fire damage would become virtually impossible to underwrite profitably, given the dramatically increased risk levels. International trade would face severe disruptions beyond the grounding of aircraft. Cargo ships, while not directly affected by atmospheric oxygen changes, would be unable to refuel at ports where fuel handling operations have become too dangerous. The Port of Los Angeles, which handles approximately 9 million 20-foot equivalent containers annually, might need to suspend operations until new safety protocols could be developed for fuel transfer and storage operations. The psychological and social implications would be equally profound. As humans adapt to their oxygen-enhanced environment, behavioral changes would likely emerge. The increased alertness and cognitive function might initially seem beneficial, but the inability to achieve normal rest states could lead to widespread sleep disorders. Human beings require periods of reduced alertness for psychological and physical restoration, but in a hyperoxic environment, achieving truly restful sleep might become difficult. Social structures built around current human capabilities would need fundamental reassessment. Educational systems designed for current attention spans and learning capacities would need to adapt to students with enhanced cognitive function, but potentially reduced patience for slower-paced instruction. Athletic competitions would require entirely new record books and potentially new categories as human performance capabilities shift dramatically. Criminal justice systems would face unique challenges as the enhanced physical and mental capabilities of the general population would affect both criminal behavior and law enforcement responses. Police and military forces would need to account for suspects and adversaries with enhanced strength, endurance, and cognitive function. Urban planning and infrastructure would require comprehensive re-evaluation. Building codes developed over decades to account for fire safety in current atmospheric conditions would be completely inadequate. Cities like New York, with approximately 8.4 million residents living in closely spaced high-rise buildings, would face enormous challenges in ensuring public safety. Emergency evacuation procedures for tall buildings would need complete revision given the accelerated fire spread rates. The medical field would experience both opportunities and challenges. Enhanced oxygen delivery could provide therapeutic benefits for patients with respiratory and cardiovascular conditions. Hospitals treating patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or heart failure might see improved patient outcomes as their conditions are effectively alleviated by the oxygen-rich atmosphere. However, medical facilities would also face operational challenges. Operating rooms, which currently use carefully controlled atmospheric conditions for surgical procedures, would need significant modifications. Electrocautery devices used in surgery, which use electrical current to cut tissue and control bleeding, would behave unpredictably in the oxygen-rich environment, potentially creating fire hazards during operations. Pharmaceutical manufacturing would face disruptions as many drug production processes involve controlled chemical reactions that assume current atmospheric conditions. The global pharmaceutical industry, valued at approximately $1.3 trillion annually, would need to reformulate production processes for countless medications. Environmental monitoring systems worldwide would register unprecedented changes. Weather stations from Antarctica to the Arctic would record atmospheric measurements unlike anything in recorded history. The Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which has monitored atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration since 1958, would suddenly be recording oxygen levels that fundamentally alter our understanding of atmospheric chemistry. Climate modelling would require complete revision. Current climate models, which factor in the heat-absorbing properties of various atmospheric gases, would need to account for the altered atmospheric composition. The increased combustion potential of the oxygen-rich atmosphere could lead to more frequent and intense natural fires, potentially releasing vast quantities of stored carbon from forests and peat bogs that have acted as carbon sinks for centuries. The Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the earth for its role in producing oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide, would face a paradoxical situation. While the trees might initially benefit from increased oxygen availability to their root systems, the dramatically increased fire risk would threaten the very existence of this critical ecosystem. The Amazon produces approximately 20% of the world's oxygen and stores an estimated 150 to 200 billion tons of carbon. A massive fire in this oxygen-rich atmosphere could release carbon emissions equivalent to several years of global fossil fuel consumption. Arctic regions would experience unique changes as the permafrost, which contains an estimated 1,600,000,000,000 tons of carbon, could face accelerated thawing due to increased decomposition rates in the oxygen-rich environment. This could create a feedback loop where increased oxygen leads to faster decomposition, releasing more carbon dioxide and methane, which could accelerate climate change even as the altered atmospheric composition creates other climate effects. Ocean ecosystems would undergo transformations that could take decades to fully understand. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming temperatures and ocean acidification, might initially benefit from increased dissolved oxygen levels. However, the accelerated decomposition of organic matter in oxygen-rich seawater could alter nutrient cycles in ways that ultimately prove harmful to these delicate ecosystems. Deep-sea exploration would become more feasible as submarines and diving equipment designed for low-oxygen environments would suddenly have access to oxygen-rich water throughout the ocean depths. This could accelerate discoveries in marine biology and potentially reveal new resources, but it would also expose previously protected deep-sea environments to human exploitation. Archaeological and paleontological implications would be significant as well. Organic artifacts preserved in low-oxygen environments for thousands of years would suddenly face rapid decomposition. Ancient burial sites, archaeological excavations, and museum collections containing organic materials would require immediate protective measures to prevent the loss of irreplaceable historical artifacts. The space industry would face interesting implications as rocket propulsion systems, which carry their own oxidizers, would suddenly have access to much more atmospheric oxygen. This could potentially reduce launch costs for certain types of missions, though the enhanced fire risk would create new challenges for ground operations at launch facilities like Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Religious and philosophical perspectives would grapple with the implications of such a fundamental planetary change. Many belief systems that view Earth as a carefully balanced creation would struggle to interpret such a dramatic overnight alteration. Scientific communities would debate whether such a change could occur naturally or would require some form of intervention, leading to widespread speculation about potential causes. International cooperation would become more critical than ever, as nations would need to coordinate responses to global challenges that transcend borders. The United Nations and other international organizations would face unprecedented demands to facilitate cooperation on fire suppression, atmospheric research, and economic stabilization efforts. As weeks and months passed in this oxygen-doubled world, human civilization would gradually adapt, but the Earth that emerged would be fundamentally different from the one we know today. New technologies would develop to harness the opportunities while mitigating the risks. Fire suppression systems might evolve to use advanced chemical suppressants, or perhaps localized atmosphere modification. Architecture would incorporate new materials and designs optimized for the high oxygen environment. Agricultural practices would adapt to both the benefits and challenges, potentially developing crops specifically engineered for the new atmospheric conditions. Energy systems would shift more rapidly toward renewable sources as combustion-based power generation becomes too difficult to manage safely. The human species itself might begin to show adaptations over longer timescales. Enhanced physical and cognitive capabilities could become the new normal, though medical science would need to develop treatments for the long-term effects of chronic hyperoxia. Future generations might view our current 21% oxygen atmosphere as stuffy and limiting, much as we might view the thin air at high altitude. This oxygen-doubled Earth would teach humanity profound lessons about the delicate balance that sustains life on our planet. It would demonstrate how seemingly beneficial changes can create cascading challenges that require unprecedented cooperation and innovation to address. Most importantly, it would reveal the extraordinary adaptability of life itself and the ingenuity of human civilization when faced with existential challenges. The world that would emerge from this atmospheric transformation would be neither utopian nor dystopian, but fundamentally different, carrying both extraordinary opportunities and severe challenges that would reshape human civilization for generations to come.